Katie is Vice President at Sunshine Sachs Morgan Lylis, based in Washington, D.C., where she specializes in developing and executing comprehensive issue advocacy campaigns with a deep expertise in public affairs, litigation, and corporate communications. So, Katie, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. So happy to be here. So thank you for joining us. Again, we are here to talk about leveraging the media so that we can really amplify the important holiday coming up next month. As Travis mentioned, I am from Sunshine Sachs Morgan Lylis, and we are working with the Civic Responsibility Project and all of the amazing partner organizations on their mission to harness the power of nonprofits, brands, and influencers working to build a vibrant civic culture. So really excited to start this journey with you all. And a reminder, today is Poll Worker Recruitment Day. And there's a great toolkit here as well. So we'll definitely get that out if you folks haven't seen. But early numbers from Power the Polls had over 1,000 signups before 9 a.m. So really excited to see our civic season really kick off here. So informally, just wanted to share a little bit about myself, and I have a little callback here. I don't know if anyone relates or this is dating me, I'm not sure, but my first sort of inkling into maybe wanting to pursue something in policy, civics, and news was on our 8th grade trip. We watched Newsies on the way down to DC. And really just thought that was a real fun film. I know it's based on a Broadway show. So that's sort of where it all started for me, and have been a really active voter since then, and just love civics. So first want to set up why are we even here? Why do we want to talk about press? And the first bullet here really is a callback to, of course, social media is so important. We really need to figure out what's the best ecosystem of social plus traditional. But we do know Americans are still getting a lot of their news, a lot of their information from what we would consider more traditional news sources. And then we also know those traditional news sources are spending a lot of their time and effort to promote that information on social. So there's really, and when we're talking about local media, that we're sort of double emphasizing that as well. So there are, Americans tuning in every night to their local news and still gathering a lot of information there. And we also saw an uptick of that during COVID. Well, there wasn't as much to do, so people probably did have the TV on more. We did see a lot of folks getting information there. And I think our hope, as part of building the civic culture, is making sure we're utilizing those sources to reach folks and really get the information they need to be active participants. Second bullet here is this push towards local media. It's a really great way to connect with the audience that's most important, to get them to come out to your activation, to get them involved in their community. And we're continuing to see local reporters really interested in how they can take a national story and make sure that they can tailor it to their community. So that's great. That's exactly what we're talking about here today. And there's a prime example I am sharing here from another client of mine, Food Corps. We had pitched a local activation in a pretty small, I think about 9,000 readership in this Massachusetts paper. And then we actually had an inbound inquiry from today.com, someone who had seen that story. So that's pretty typical. As we're talking to national media every day and always asking them where they're getting their news, they are looking at local papers. They're, of course, scrolling through now X, formerly Twitter, but they definitely are digging deep into local coverage. And then the third sort of call out here, it's a busy cycle. There's a lot going on, especially when we're talking about voting and elections. Today's busy one as well. So it takes a lot of effort, you know, as you're building these relationships with local reporters. You know, it's important to get creative in terms of how you're reaching them. Again, I think that's where social is helpful and important. You want to make sure you have, you know, you can even DM reporters. But I, you know, recently heard from a national producer that said, you know, point blank, you know, it's telling when folks do follow up on a pitch they sent. That is a signal to me that it's important and that they care about it, which I thought was pretty refreshing and interesting. So getting into the mechanics a little bit here, first and foremost, the most sort of standard outreach, right, is via email. And I think one of the most important things about email communication for anybody is keeping it short, right? We're all getting hundreds, thousands of emails a day. Reporters are absolutely in that same things happening to them. So I like to think of, you know, this communication is really just to grab that interest. If a reporter wants more information, if they're interested, they will reply, they will ask questions. So think of, you know, the subject line as sort of our marquee. What is the, you know, small little space of how we're getting their attention just from seeing a subject line. So action oriented, making sure that you're adding in the date for National Voter Registration Day. Add that urgency, make sure they know you definitely want to talk to you before the 19th. And then, you know, if they're, you know, sometimes it's even really nice to include, you know, hi Susan, hi so-and-so into the subject line because they know then it's personalized. So all of those things, you know, focusing on the subject line, making sure it feels action oriented and can help grab their attention to open up the email. And then again, you know, 3 lines is, you know, as short and impactful as you can be in that communication. Again, you know, if there's interest, they'll then follow up. We don't need to give the whole story in an email. And in fact, that, you know, can kind of turn off our, you know, X out, oh, this is too much, I can't handle this right now. But I think the other really important things to include in the body of that email communication, what are your expert voices you're putting forward? They want to know who they can hear from to get more information, make sure you have, you know, the credentials or the perspective of that person. And then, of course, you know, how do we create a little conflict of urgency? I think some of the ways we can do that, of course, our news hook of National Voter Registration Day. Is there a data point? I know there's some great resources on the toolkit that has data. Is there a way for you to localize any of that data, even if it's just state localization? That's really helpful for reporters. And then, you know, we're including this sort of counter narrative around, you know, civics is a great way to build unity and is much more reflective of, you know, how folks are approaching elections than maybe some of the rhetoric that folks are seeing. And again, that's really helpful for us, of course, because we're nonpartisan. So all of those things are really important to try and get into that first email communication. And again, you know, you definitely need to follow up, especially on local news stations, really calling and talking to the news assignment editor, talking to whoever is answering the phone at the news desk. Is it absolutely essential to move along those email pitches as well. Other really important things for TV when you are pitching, what are the visuals? Is there an opportunity for someone, you know, a reporter to come out and film, get some BRoll? Another creative way to sort of build those relationships is having them participate, or if the event is starting off with a panel, using a local news anchor to moderate that panel, you know, helps build that camaraderie. And, you know, a local station is definitely interested in, you know, profiling what their own talent is doing as well. And then in this last bullet here under TV and visuals, again, I use this for all pitches, is not using the word spokesperson. So it sounds a little nitty gritty, but media doesn't want to hear from a spokesperson, actually. They want to hear from the folks actually doing the work. They want to hear from the local experts. They want to hear from trusted community voices. So are there folks that you're connected to in your community that have done media before that you can also, bring in and say, hey, would you, be open to being a spokesperson for us or talking about our initiative, and making sure that you're utilizing those folks within your networks. And then there's just a note here, media loves to focus on what young people are doing, universities are doing, maybe a local business is doing. So making sure that you're thinking through who is the best messenger for your event to really gain that interest. And then lastly here, added in just print and digital are really good practice if you've had an event is collecting quotes along the way, collecting photo or video assets that you can then share out to media, especially digital and print folks that may not have the resource to send somebody, but may actually cover something if they have those items to make the story a little bit easier for them, packaged up nicely. They may have a few questions, but they could probably turn something around without too much more information if you're able to give them, videos and quotes or photos.
We did have a couple questions. Just on that last one, if you can just explain a little bit more, what is BRoll? A couple people asking that.
Yeah. Wonderful question. BRoll is any sort of stocked video image that supports your story. For example, I'm going to go back to Food Corps just because they're top of mind for me right now. They're a service organization working in schools, providing education around food services. So they have great BRoll just of some of their volunteers working in school. It doesn't necessarily have to be from the event itself, but it's really helpful to add just a visual element to whatever you're speaking about. Some other examples, if you've had tape from a previous event that shows action, students doing something or folks signing up or volunteering in some fashion, typically there's not sound to it. It's just a visual element that they'll play alongside their stories.
Right.
And the only other really important thing about BRoll is you want to make sure you own the rights to it. But one place that you can search for, and I don't know in this context would be necessarily helpful, but maybe somewhere like a C-SPAN, there are places where you can get visuals that are public domain, but very important to make sure that you own those rights.
Great. And then we did have an earlier question of when you referred to the local drives national, how that conversation is affected by the decline of local news outlets.
Got it. So I think one, we know there are a lot of sort of these feeder networks, Nexstar being one of them. They definitely rely more on reporters that are putting together packages and servicing them out. But again, I do think there's still a lot of national reporters, looking to local media to harvest news stories. If you're facing, there isn't, a vibrant local news community, there are, like I said, some of those feeder organizations. The Gannett News Service, I think, is a great one to tap into as well, because they do a really good job of making sure that folks across all of the local papers and USA Today have a lot more reach and pull through their local paper.
Great. We've got a few more questions for this section. One more may have come in. What do you do if you don't get interest in response? And I think relatedly, if you can talk a little bit about the role of kind of press releases and pitching, if those are useful for news outlets or if they're just not looking at those anymore.
Yeah, so I think when you're not hearing back, I definitely would say at minimum, giving yourself time to send the initial pitch, waiting a few days to follow up via email. And I think in that follow-up, it's always good to not just say, hey, I'm here following up, but maybe adding a little bit more information. If there's a different, expert or voice that you also have in your, wheelhouse to offer, that's great too. So just seeing if there's, being creative with that follow-up and not wasting sort of the space, adding something new or different. And again, calling news stations is absolutely, I do it all the time for local pitches. It really is critical because, that's the person. If you're, call the station, ask for the news assignment editor or director, and they're the ones really deciding, if they have time and bandwidth. The response sometimes can be, and they're only making those decisions a few days out. So know that if you have an event, happening on that Thursday, definitely start calling on that Monday. And they'll typically say something like, this sounds interesting, like send me this direct information, or send this to the news desk. And that's when you'll want to send through sort of a more formalized media advisory, which just says the who, what, where, why, when, information, so they have it in one place. And then I think the other tactics in terms of if you're not hearing back is deciding, is there a way to change this pitch up to reach a different reporter? Is it, maybe there is a business voice you can include, so then maybe you would reach out to somebody in the business section. It can be a little bit you're not going to hear back all the time. It's definitely a little bit of a volume to response game, but it's also good if you are feeling like, oh, I've sent this pitch out to 50 people and haven't back. Go back to the drawing board in terms of how you're pitching. Maybe you need to switch it up, but maybe you need to change the subject line a little bit. But there's definitely, like I said, a little volume to response work that has to be done to gain that attention.
Great. We will pick up the rest of the questions in the next section.
Great. Okay, so now you've done the pitching, you've landed an interview. Congrats, great job. So how do we prepare for an interview? And I think folks are newer to doing media, this is where the nerves start to kick in. But first and foremost, especially with the subject matter we're talking about, I think there's sort of a couple guiding principles of, before you are in an interview, it's great to ask questions. A reporter, never think you can't ask questions. If the reporter doesn't want to answer them, they won't answer them. So it's good to make clear in terms of even the logistics of the interview. Is this live? Is this going to be taped and then aired live? Or are you planning on cutting this down? Those will all impact how you're giving the answers and sort of the timeliness, because we're focused on a day, you'll have less of that. But if for some reason they say, oh, we want to come to the event, but we're actually not going to be able to air this until, next week, you just want to make sure what you're saying still feels fresh, and not necessarily, just talking about, we're going to do this, but this is what we did. This is the importance of it. So feel free to ask questions. And then as you're preparing yourself, you definitely want to practice, and that can be anything from very formalized of doing a mock interview with a friend or colleague, or recording yourself. I know it's sometimes a little cringe to hear your own voice, but it definitely, that is the best way to practice. Put on your little voice recorder, prep your answers, listen back, and the more you practice, the better the outcomes will be. And for that practice, even writing out 3 key messages, not necessarily want to read them off, you want to make sure you feel pretty natural, but even the function, right, of focusing on what those 3 messages are. I say 3, I think usually those interviews are going to be pretty short. So that helps you just figure out what are the most important points. When I walk away from this interview, what do I want to make sure I've said? And then I think for us, because of the subject matter, it's good to have a pivot. And we'll talk about a little bit more of that in the next section, just to make sure that we're keeping our messaging nonpartisan. We're not leaning into any of some of the narratives around elections right now. And then during an interview, stick to those sound bites. It may feel as though you're not giving enough information, but it's actually the best way, one, for a reporter to then to cut something down. If they have only one small snippet, it's easier for them, and it helps your message get across clearly. And know that, if you're on a phone interview with a print journalist, they're most likely taking notes. So if they ask a question, you give your answer. It's fine to just stop talking. I think folks naturally want to sort of fill that silence, but usually, the reporter's either processing or writing down, thinking of their next question. So it's perfectly fine to just stop and wait. And if they have a follow-up question, they will ask. And then always approach the interview, especially, folks that are new to media, consider everything you say to a journalist on the record. It can be quoted. Sometimes, beginning an interview, they're doing some sort of warm up, and may offhandedly say something like, wow, I don't know if you saw, Donald Trump last night do X, Y, and Z, right? And that's where, something like that could, share something that's more personal and not from the point of view of the org and the mission that you're trying to accomplish. And then lastly, if you don't know the answer to a question, it's perfectly fine to say, I don't have all the information there. Or if you're in a print interview, be like, oh, I'd love to, get back to you on that point. Definitely better to not answer and follow up as opposed to share something that you're not confident. Stats can be a little tricky. What is the stat, like 99% of stats are made up, or so let's just make sure that we're really confident in our answers, and it's always appropriate to follow up. And then lastly, reporters make mistakes. They're trying to, they're covering a lot of issues. Definitely check out any of the pieces that air. Make sure all the information is correct. Things like your title, your name, all of those things, always good to make sure they're correct. If you see errors, definitely, send a note to the reporter and say, oh, I was reading your piece. Thank you so much. I did notice something was spelled incorrectly, or the data point you shared wasn't the correct one. You can always ask for corrections based on facts. It can get a little bit tricky sometimes in terms of determining what's a fact and what's more of a, nuanced piece of information. But, the worst thing you can do is ask and then push back. But I think in our case, most of this is going to be pretty clear cut in terms of the information. We just want to make sure it's all correct. And then again, it's great to just say thank you.
Couple questions here. Some mix of questions from this section, some from the last section, so we'll kind of go in reverse order. Crystal, you're wondering what's the best days and time to send press releases ahead of an event?
Yes, I didn't necessarily address press releases from the last question, so I'll try that out. I think press releases are still very helpful tool, especially to share after an event. As close as you can, if you have your event earlier in the day and you're able to get it out later that day, that's great, or early the next morning. I think morning time, depending on who you're pitching. If you're pitching a morning TV show, you want to wait until the afternoon, right, to send them a pitch or a note, because they're actively engaging in their program. I have actually had an instance where someone was pitching morning shows going on, and that's not going to be very effective. But for the most case, if you're trying to get something on the evening news, or you're working with a digital reporter, morning time really is a good time for them. They're, checking out the news, they're deciding on, what they're going to pitch their editors. That tends to be a good time. But for the event recap or press release. The closest you can get to after the event wraps, the better, because it's just, then it's still fresh.
Good guidance there. Another question here from Mackie saying, how do you get reporters interested in more subjective things like rallies? We try to provide facts like turnout, et cetera, but I find that most media aren't interested in it. I
think that's where you're going to have to lean on if there are, more local experts or trusted community members at the rally, or again, you're right in terms of numbers, sharing visuals, of course. And then I think if there's some sort of additional call to action, so for us, that would be something like registering or, something else that viewers can do, because to your point, if not everyone can go, it's nice to have something else that they can inform the viewers that will help, even if they can't go to the event itself.
Yeah, and to that question earlier about kind of press release timing, is there, we had some folks asking how soon should they begin promoting National Voter Registration Day? Obviously the day is going to be on the 19th. So is there kind of a good, starting obviously with now as the start point?
Yeah, I would say generally, if we're talking about local media, 2 to 3 weeks out, I mean, I think that that's going to allow you enough time to think through if you need to go wider with the pitch, setting up interviews, those things can take time too, knowing that the reporters, especially the ones we're trying to target, probably have a lot of news they're trying to cover the next few weeks. So I would say 3 weeks out on like the digital print side. On the TV side, probably 2, because they're not usually quite as long lead, unless you have, a local PBS station or, I noticed there's a lot of local sort of like political affair weekly shows. Those take a lot longer lead time. So something like that of a regular segment that you see that might be a fit. I would put those at a 3-week timeline as well.
Awesome. Okay, that's what we got for now. Again, reminding folks, if you have questions, drop in the Q&A section and we'll kind of take those as we go. But until then, back to you, Katie.
The current news cycle. There is a lot of partisan talk. We are, today is a GOP debate. That is taking up a lot of the narrative. As my colleagues that you can't see here are working to pitch poll worker recruitment day today. Folks really are focused on the debate itself. So again, we have sort of tried to go back to that kind of narrative of we are nonpartisan, and here's the information that we're providing. Because the media themselves, are trying to do the best job to present facts, and we do have that advantage of having nonpartisan messaging language and viewpoint. But that doesn't mean a reporter isn't going to ask about your thoughts on Donald Trump or trying to lead you in with some questions. So again, make sure you practice those pivots. And think ahead of time if there are some hot button issues, if locally there are, make sure you're looking at the reporting and coverage of that reporter. Have they been focused on one particular partisan race? It's just good to have a really good understanding of what questions might come up in practice. For example, we've been doing some interview prep for today, and the question of safety comes up. And we're really taking the stance of making sure we correct the record and the facts that we have data that shows that most poll workers, in fact, are very positive about the experience and that it is safe. That's an important narrative for us to correct and keep clear. Especially, knowing that there were 2 poll workers part of one of the latest indictments, right? Like that is the highest sort of news that we're now pitching against. So you have to really make sure you're prepped for that. And again, some of those pivots are, I'm not comfortable answering that, or, we are nonpartisan. And if you are getting questions about specific candidates or, how folks are going to vote, those are all things that you can deflect of, that question is best answered probably by the candidate and his team. And that's not really where we're wading in terms of our goals.
Yeah, all great stuff there. We can speak from personal experience. We're National Voter Registration Day proper, and we get asked those partisan questions too. So it can be difficult.
Yeah, it definitely can be difficult. And again, I think that goes back to setting up the parameters ahead of time too, and being clear with reporters of what you can discuss based on your, nonpartisan status.
Do you have any strategies? This is kind of a question I guess I'm going to ask, is like, we want to walk we don't want to be we don't want to be partisan, but is there a way to kind of harness the energy behind a partisan question or a partisan moment? For example, today being the debate, would you have kind of recommendations for how to take the kernel of, oh, it's a debate, it's exciting, but not wade into partisanship, and kind of make it still work for your topic?
Yeah, I think it's important for us to look at the election calendar, right, which includes, of course, all the debates that are going to be coming up on the GOP side, primaries, et cetera, and use that as a news hook, knowing that it has to be presented in a way of, as you're covering the debate, your readers might be, want to make sure your readers have the most information on how to vote. I think that is something that we want to see more of, right? Of where can you get the information? You're reading, all of these headlines and, recaps of debates, but there should then be, well, how do I actually participate? So I think that's really important. And I think just that line of, as you're covering, our goal is to really get out in front of a lot of the political newsletters, because those are great places where they tend to have more of sort of the resource sections, and less of just the play calling of, the show. So I think, we definitely lean on those places to try and get some of our, resources, materials included.
We got a couple questions here relating to costs of advertising for folks. It says, can you speak to some of the costs associated with digital and TV advertisement if folks are looking at exploring paid options beyond earned media and organic reach?
I would say it varies so much by location, and if we're talking about a local media market, so I would definitely need a little bit more in terms of, I have knowledge of ballpark at this point. What I will say is, social amplification, paid social, tends to, a lower entry cost, and I think a lot of people might realize, and I would push that over maybe some of the more traditional paid opportunities, because I think that our goal is to get someone to take action online in most of these cases, so that conversion rate, one, it's very measurable, and two, it's less of a barrier. I think on the local media front, I would really try on the earned side first and foremost, in most cases.
We got a comment here, not necessarily a question, but it is kind of speaking to what we're talking about from, let's see here, Rosemary. I think we need to emphasize that we are encouraging people to register to vote, not to tell them how to vote. If the reporter wants to know how people are voting, refer them to their favorite polls, Gallup, CNN, New York Times, etc. We agree with that. And you know what, mentioning this communication resources we put together, we have a set of talking points that kind of angle around this kind of stuff, because I'll give you folks an example. Last year, during last year's holiday, we were asked by a reporter, whether the enthusiasm we were seeing was perhaps tied into the Supreme Court taking down Roe v. Wade. It's a great question, but it's not a question that we want to talk about. We're nonpartisan. And what we kind of lean on is that, in this very partisan world, one thing is nonpartisan, that's elections and voting. It belongs to everybody. And just different versions of that tend to be helpful. And those talking points are in the chat for you folks if you want to take a look at them, along with all of our resources. Does National Voter Registration Day website keep track of how many people register to vote in each county? And if so, is that accessible? So we have a report every year at the end of the year. And once we kind of crunched the numbers and figured out, where the registrations took place, how many we got, and we can break it down on a granular level. I would recommend, if you want to see reports from the past, go on our website under the About section, and you'll find our reports going back to, I believe, 2019 or 2018. We can give you older ones if you're curious. But yeah, I guess so. If there are no more questions about kind of the content we've been working on, a little exercise we want to do, where we want to talk about kind of some of your pitches, listeners, some of your ideas about National Voter Registration Day and how to work what we've just learned from Katie into what you're planning to do this year. So I've got a couple questions. We're going to kind of do this like talk show style. I'm going to ask the question. You folks can raise your hand, and we'll kind of turn your mic off, and you can kind of share your thoughts with us. So I guess question one, for anybody, open to the whole audience here. What inspires you about your work National Voter Registration Day, and how can we craft that into a pitch? So tell us something about the holiday that really inspires you, and how would you go about turning that into a pitch for a reporter?
Hello, this is Donna, and I am the CEO and founder of Vote Voiced. And the one thing that inspires me about Voter Registration Day is the fact that people are so appreciative of what we do on Voter Registration Day. And a lot of people know about it. And I think that's up to you guys, that you have really stuck with this. You help us to get out there. And what I would say to a reporter is that local elections matter, that if you're not registered properly, then you cannot vote possibly. And I would say that we keep up with our light bill, our phone bill. We tell everyone we've moved, but our Secretary of State or our clerk's office, our registration can be 20 years out of date and we never give it a second thought. So it's important that we start to instill in ourselves and instill in our children the importance of keeping up your voter registration. And that is what inspires me not to give up, no matter what, to keep getting the message out, no matter, because we're grassroots level, no matter even if it's just a handful of people at a park or in a grocery store or wherever, just to let people know, make sure your registration is up to date, and tell 3 friends to make sure their registration is up to date. Thank you.
Fantastic. We had some folks sharing some love for you in the comments here. We've got some time up. We'd like to hear some more pitches. So anybody else who's got their hand up, if you can take, kind of like Donna just did, take something that you feel passionate about in regard to National Voter Registration Day and turn into a pitch. We'd love to hear it.
Hi there. Good afternoon or good morning to everybody out there on this chat. Just a couple things about voter registration for me and why I think it's so important. I'm from Arizona, Native American, been working on this topic for quite some time, ever since I started voting. But over the few years, I think one thing that I believe helps and really gets people engaged is the passion of the workers. Donna was a great example. If we can continually bring in people who are really passionate and focused on the topic, the importance of voter registration, I think we can make more leaps and bounds. For Native Americans in Arizona, it was 1948 when we were able to get the right to vote. Think about that. Where were your grandparents? Where were your parents at that time? And we were probably one of the last states that allowed Native American people to vote. So we tell this to the younger people, and anybody in Arizona, they're kind of astounded to know that. So having that ability is something that is a message we continually try to drive. And also for me, it's kind of a passion that drives me in just about everything I do. But that would be my message today. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would just like to say, I think, you know, one point that might have been missed, or we want to make sure people know, I think the more sort of human interest element, right, that you can add, and that can, you know, Donna, I asked you specifically how you came to the work. I think if there's even, you know, a way to convey, you know, you've been working, you know, doing this work for a few cycles, like I think adding that narrative and information behind pitches is really important, because that is what media is interested in. I love, you know, an important human interest story. And then if you're, you know, talking through folks that you are registering, I think sharing those points of, you know, how folks react, and those are all really important and really meaningful things to share that folks will connect with.
Yeah, that was a terrific story. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, June. We've got time for, I think, one more pitch.
Hello, hello. So my pitch is that I am a Black woman who has chosen two careers that are service driven. I'm a registered nurse as well as an educator, and I believe that it's a civic duty to vote. It is our civic duty to vote so that we can address specific issues that not only impact us at the state level, the national level, but as someone said earlier, the local levels. The local elections definitely count. We want to be able to be influence who's in office by our vote. Our vote matter. But also we want to be able to vote on the budget. Where is the money going? And who's actually spending it? And making sure that we bring that money back, those funds back to our local school districts, back to our local areas for infrastructure, you know, to ensure that we're able to function as a society as a whole. And so that is why I do what I do. As an educator, I speak to my students to let them know, you know, the importance of registering to vote, the items that they need to vote for is the birth certificate, the state ID.
You may have lost your audio there. I think we caught the gist of what you were saying there, Felicia. You got any comment on that, Katie?
I think what I'm hearing there is I like the messages around, you know, voting is a way to be active in your community. And I do think we've taken that local message is finally getting across. I think a lot of folks are getting more engaged in local elections. So I think that this is, you know, that messaging really does work.
So we got two kind of final questions here from folks. First one here is looking for a pitch to young people who don't think their vote matters. Any ideas? And of course, like we talk about this every election cycle. Where are the young people? Are they voting? Are they interested? You know, there's lots of different takes on this. We frankly see the enthusiasm last cycle was a great example, was huge. But you know, Katie, how would you address that? People generally who might not think their vote matters, and you know, how to get them out and actually go take part.
Yeah, I think one, I do think we need to help sort of correct the narrative. Folks are voting. And I think we also, when we're talking about young people, I think that's, we mentioned earlier, if, you know, seeing how do we get more young people as part of these media moments, right? Because if you're seeing yourself reflected back, that's really sort of the best messenger. And, you know, we're actually working on releasing a report with the Civic Responsibility Project later this year around celeb and influencer, which I know a lot of folks, you know, might roll their eyes at, but it is working in terms of engaging young people. And I think the other important part of messaging around voting, you can still be nonpartisan, but still talk about the fact that voting impacts all of the issues that young people really do care about. So no matter what you're passionate about, voting is really sort of the first step into creating the future that you want to see. So I think those messages work, and the fact that we are, you know, we are seeing young people getting engaged. You know, I think there's a larger work to be done in terms of creating this civic culture, and really making it as exciting as cheering on your favorite sports team. That's ultimately the goal and narrative that we're working towards. And it's going to take time, but I think all of this work really helps. And again, I think as much as we can reflect those voices back to the folks we're trying to engage, that really does work.
And our last question here, this one is one of our favorite questions to get, but I'd like to hear your take on it. So this is my first time being in voter registration, getting involved in voter registration, and I work at a college library. What is the best way to start? And when it comes to just how to get started in general there, our website is a great resource. I'm not just saying it because I helped to make it, but it really is. It's full of guides for how to get started, for tally sheets, how to keep track of how many folks you're registering, of good conversation starters. We have guides for every state for what the rules are around voter registration and the best way you can make sure you're complying with everything. Communications toolkits for kind of ready-made social media graphics and posts. We make it every part as easy as possible if we can. So you want everybody to take part in this. Speaking of taking part, we know a lot of folks want to jump in and kind of give us their pitches. We're sorry we're running out of time. We're sure they're great, but thank you so much for the enthusiasm. And as we're kind of winding down here, I just want to emphasize again, the National Registration Day is happening on September 19th. We're very excited. This is going to be our 11th year. Last year was our official decade of democracy. Now we're beginning 10 more years. So we're super excited to celebrate this nonpartisan holiday with folks from across the country, to make sure everyone, no matter what your ideology is, where you stand, takes part and gets ready to vote. Because we've been saying it all year long. 31 states are having state and local elections this year, and this is the last National Voter Registration Day before all of the primary contests. So if we're going to get hundreds of thousands of Americans registered in a single day to take part and have their voice heard, 2023 and 2024, this is the best chance we got. So thank you so much again, Katie, for joining us, for taking the time out of, I know it's been a very busy, again, poll worker recruitment day. If you're not a poll worker and you're listening out there, call your local town hall, see what it takes. Get in touch with Power the Polls. They're great on this. They're a friend of ours. And thank you all so much for joining us. If you have questions, again, email us at info@nationalvoterregistrationday.org. All one word, all together. Sign up if you're not already a partner. And thanks for taking time out of your day to learn how to pitch the media for this great civic holiday that we love so much. Thanks again, and see you all soon.